The vastness of space stretched endlessly around the damaged spacecraft. Captain Daniel Rains gritted his teeth, gripping the controls as alarms blared around him. His ship had been hit by an unexpected gravitational anomaly, pulling him through a wormhole before he could escape. Now his vessel was in freefall, hurtling toward an unknown planet below. Daniel barely had time to brace himself before impact. The ship crashed into the thick jungle, metal groaning under the pressure. Sparks flickered, and smoke filled the cabin. His head spun, but he forced himself to move. He had survived the landing. Now he had to survive whatever awaited him outside. Struggling out of his harness, he grabbed his emergency survival pack and pried open the damaged hatch. The fresh air rushed in, carrying an unfamiliar scent. Stepping out, Daniel found himself surrounded by towering bioluminescent trees, their strange glow casting eerie shadows across the thick underbrush. "This isn't Earth," he muttered. "Not even close." His communicator was dead. The emergency beacon was active, but there was no telling if it would work this far out in uncharted space. He needed to assess his situation and find shelter before nightfall. As he took a step forward, a strange whispering sound filled the air. Daniel froze, his instincts flaring to life. Something, or someone, was nearby. Before he could react, shadowy figures emerged from the trees. They were humanoid but taller than any human, with smooth, dark-hued skin and glowing silver eyes. Their armor looked organic, as if grown rather than forged, and they carried weapons that pulsed with an unfamiliar energy. Daniel slowly raised his hands. "I mean no harm." The tallest figure, a female warrior, stepped forward, observing him with intense curiosity. Her gaze flickered over his uniform, his face, and then the wreckage behind him. They exchanged glances in a language he couldn't understand. Then, in a move too quick for him to react, the warrior lifted a small glowing device and pressed it to his forehead. A sharp jolt shot through Daniel's body, and for a moment, his mind blurred. But then, understanding. "Who are you?" The warrior's voice was suddenly clear. Daniel blinked. He had just heard an unknown alien language, but somehow it had translated directly into English. "My name is Daniel Rains," he answered cautiously. "I come in peace. My ship crashed here." The warriors exchanged glances again. The female leader studied him before speaking. "You are human." There was something strange in her tone. Recognition. Daniel frowned. "You know about humans." The warrior hesitated before nodding. "Come with us." It wasn't a request. Daniel knew he had no choice. Running would be useless against highly advanced aliens in their own territory. So, keeping his movement slow, he let them lead him deeper into the jungle. A city unlike any other. After what felt like an hour of walking, the jungle opened up to reveal a breathtaking sight. A vast city of crystalline towers, pulsing with energy. The structures floated slightly above the ground, defying gravity. Strange, elegant bridges connected the buildings, and winged creatures soared through the sky, carrying supplies or passengers. Daniel had seen many planets in his time as an explorer, but this was something beyond imagination. The warriors led him into the largest structure, where ornate doors slid open without a sound. Inside, the air was filled with a soft hum of energy, as if the very walls were alive. At the center of the grand hall, a throne of shifting light stood, occupied by the most regal figure Daniel had ever seen. Queen Cyra. She was taller than her warriors, her silver eyes glowing with intelligence and power. She wore a flowing robe that shimmered with colors Daniel couldn't name. But what struck him most was the way she studied him, not with fear, but curiosity. "So," she said, her voice smooth yet commanding, "a human has finally come to my world." Daniel remained still. Finally. The way she said it, it was as if she had been expecting him. "I didn't come here on purpose," he admitted. "My ship crashed." The queen leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Perhaps. But fate is not so simple." The word sent a chill through him. He didn't know why, but something told him this was only the beginning. Daniel stood before Queen Cyra, feeling the weight of her gaze on him. The grand hall was silent, except for the faint hum of energy that pulsed through the floating crystalline walls. The warriors who had brought him here stood motionless, waiting for their queen's command. The way she had spoken earlier still echoed in his mind. Finally, what did she mean by that? Cyra's silver eyes studied him, as if searching for something hidden beneath his skin. Then she spoke. "You are the first human to stand in my court," she said, her voice smooth yet filled with authority. "Do you know what that means?" Daniel swallowed. "I'm guessing it's not a coincidence." A small smile touched the queen's lips. "No, it is not." She motioned toward one of her attendants, who approached with a small glowing orb. "This is a memory stone," Cyra explained. "It will allow me to see your thoughts, your past, your truth." Daniel took a small step back. "You want to read my mind?" Cyra tilted her head. "Only the moments that define you. If you speak the truth, you have nothing to fear." Daniel hesitated. His instincts told him not to trust a device that could pull memories straight from his brain. But he was alone on an unknown planet, surrounded by an advanced alien species. If he refused, things might turn bad quickly. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. "Fine, do it." The attendant pressed the orb to Daniel's forehead. A warm sensation spread through his skull, like a gentle current running through his mind. Images flashed before his eyes. His childhood, his training as a pilot, his first mission in deep space. The crash, the jungle, and then something strange happened. A pulse of golden light erupted from the memory stone, making the attendants gasp. Cyra's eyes widened in shock. The warriors around them murmured in confusion. Daniel pulled away, rubbing his forehead. What the hell was that? Cyra stared at him with something he couldn't quite place. Surprise? Suspicion? Or was it recognition? "The stone responded to you in a way I have never seen before," she said slowly. "It is as if you belong here." Daniel frowned. "That's impossible. I've never been here before." Cyra leaned back in her throne, her fingers tapping the armrest in deep thought. "Tell me, human, what do you know about the auxiliary race?" Daniel crossed his arms. "Nothing. I didn't even know you existed until today." Cyra gave a slow nod, as if confirming something to herself. "Then it seems fate has brought you here for a reason." She stood, and the room instinctively fell into silence. "From this moment forward," she declared, "this human will remain under my royal protection." The warriors bowed their heads. The attendants nodded, but Daniel could feel the tension in the air. Not everyone agreed with this decision. One of the warriors, a large alien with midnight black armor, stepped forward. "My queen, with respect, the human is an unknown factor. What if he is dangerous?" Cyra turned her gaze toward the warrior. "I trust the stone. It has spoken." Daniel exhaled. He had no idea what just happened, but at least he wasn't getting thrown into a cell. The queen looked at him again, her expression unreadable. "Come, human. There is much I must show you." A city of wonders. Daniel walked beside Queen Cyra, flanked by two of her guards as they moved through the heart of the auxiliary capital. The city was unlike anything he had ever seen. Floating bridges connected massive crystalline towers, their surfaces shimmering with unknown energy. Alien creatures moved through the streets, some humanoid, others completely unfamiliar. It was a civilization far beyond anything humanity had encountered. As they walked, Cyra spoke. "Our people have ruled this world for centuries," she explained. "But in recent years, we have faced a crisis." Daniel glanced at her. "What kind of crisis?" She hesitated before answering. "Our species is dying." Daniel stopped walking. "Dying?" Cyra nodded. "Our birth rates have fallen drastically. We have not had a natural-born child in over a century." Daniel's brow furrowed. "That's strange. What's causing it? We do not know, Cyra admitted. We have tried science, tradition, and even ancient rituals, but nothing works. Daniel absorbed this information. An advanced alien race struggling with extinction. It sounded like something out of an old sci-fi story. But why was she telling him this? He got his answer when they arrived at a massive temple-like structure in the center of the city. Inside, at the far end of the room, was a large glowing crystal suspended in midair. This, Cyra said, is the Genesis Stone. It is the key to our survival. Daniel studied it. The stone pulsed with an almost alive energy. Something about it felt familiar. Cyra took a step closer. Every Xilari ruler has tried to awaken it, but it has remained dormant for generations. She turned to him, her silver eyes locked onto his. And yet, today when the memory stone touched you, it reacted. Daniel's heart pounded. You think I have something to do with this? Cyra nodded. I do not believe in coincidences, human. Daniel took a deep breath, staring at the stone. Something told him this was only the beginning. Daniel stood before the Genesis Stone, its pulsating glow reflecting in his eyes. The energy it emitted was unlike anything he had ever felt. Ancient, powerful, alive. He wasn't a scientist, but even he could tell that this crystal was more than just a relic. It held something inside it, something waiting to be awakened. Queen Cyra watched him closely. Her silver eyes, usually calm and unreadable, now carried a trace of something new. Hope. This stone has remained dormant for generations, she said, stepping closer. Our greatest minds have tried to understand it, but it refuses to respond to us. Daniel turned to her. And you think, I can do something about it? Cyra nodded. The memory stone reacted to you in a way we have never seen before. The Genesis Stone is our last chance to save our species. If it reacts to you, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Then you may be the key to something greater than you understand. Daniel took a deep breath. All right, let's give it a try. He raised his hand and slowly moved it toward the glowing crystal. The moment his fingertips touched its surface, the entire chamber shook. A blinding golden light burst from the stone, engulfing him in a warm, pulsing energy. Images flashed through his mind. Visions of ancient Xilari rulers, forgotten wars, and something even stranger, humans and Xilari together. He gasped and pulled his hand away, stumbling back. The light dimmed, but the energy still buzzed in the air, as if something deep within the stone had awakened. Cyra stared at him, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. It reacted to you, she whispered. You truly are different. Daniel shook his head, trying to steady his breathing. What just happened? Cyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to her attendants, who had been watching the event unfold with wide, stunned eyes. Summon the high scholars, she ordered. They must see this. One of the attendants, a tall Xilari male, hesitated. My queen, if what we saw is true, then he may be more than just a visitor. Cyra's gaze hardened. I am aware of that. The attendant bowed and hurried away. Daniel rubbed his temples, still trying to make sense of everything. Can someone explain what just happened? Cyra turned back to him. The Genesis Stone holds the genetic memories of our ancestors. It has remained silent for centuries, but when you touched it, it awakened. Daniel frowned. Genetic memories. You mean it stores the past? Cyra nodded. Not just the past, but the future as well. Daniel didn't like the sound of that. He had always believed in science, facts, and things that could be explained. But here he was, standing in front of an alien artifact that just reacted to him like he was some kind of chosen one. And then something even stranger happened. Cyra suddenly staggered, clutching her chest. Are you okay? Daniel stepped forward, instinctively reaching out to steady her. The moment his hand touched her arm, another pulse of golden light erupted, wrapping around both of them. For a brief moment, Daniel felt as if his entire body was connected to hers. He could feel her heartbeat, her breath, and even her thoughts. Then, just as quickly as it happened, the energy vanished. Cyra gasped, her eyes wide with shock. She took a step back, staring at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. "What was that?" Daniel asked, his voice uneasy. Cyra looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I do not know." She was lying. He could see it in her eyes. Daniel exhaled. "Look, Queen Cyra, I didn't ask for any of this. I don't know why the stone reacted to me, and I definitely don't know why we just connected like that." Cyra took a deep breath, regaining her composure. "Nor do I. But one thing is certain." Her gaze met his. "You are more than just a human traveler. You are now part of something far greater than yourself." Daniel wasn't sure how to respond to that. But deep inside, he knew she was right. Meanwhile, in the depths of the Cyra city, hidden from the Queen's view, a group of cloaked figures gathered in the shadows. They had seen what had happened at the temple. They had seen the human awaken the stone, and they were not pleased. One of them, a Cyra with piercing violet eyes, turned to the others. "This human is dangerous," he hissed. "If the Queen places her faith in him, she will lead us to ruin." Another nodded. "We must act before it is too late." The leader narrowed his eyes. "Prepare everything. If the Queen will not see reason, we will make sure the human is never a problem again." In the grand halls of the palace, Daniel had no idea that he had just become a target, and his real challenges were only beginning. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between him and Queen Cyra. Ever since the Genesis stone reacted to him, the way she looked at him had shifted, less like a ruler studying an outsider, and more like someone searching for answers. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. Walking through the royal palace, he took in his surroundings. The architecture was a strange mix of nature and technology, with crystals growing like living trees, glowing softly along the walls. Cyra symbols shimmered on the floor, shifting as he walked past them, as if responding to his presence. This place was far beyond human understanding. Beside him, Cyra walked in silence. She had been unusually quiet ever since their strange energy connection in the temple. Finally, Daniel decided to break the silence. "You've been acting different since what happened at the Genesis stone," he said, glancing at her. "Did you feel something too?" Cyra's silver eyes flickered to him, and for the first time since they met, he noticed something unusual: uncertainty. "I do not know," she admitted, "but something within me has changed." Daniel frowned. "Changed how?" She hesitated before answering. "I feel connected to you. It is not something I can explain." Daniel exhaled. "Great. That's not weird at all." Cyra gave him a small, unreadable smile. "You fear the unknown." "I fear surprises," Daniel corrected. "And this whole situation is one big surprise after another." Cyra stopped walking. "Then let us understand it together." Before Daniel could respond, a sudden shockwave rippled through the palace. The floor trembled, and the floating crystals flickered as if reacting to an unseen force. Cyra gasped, clutching her chest. Daniel grabbed her arm. "Are you okay?" Her breath came out sharp, her silver eyes glowing brighter than before. I do not know what is happening." She stepped back, trying to steady herself, but the glow in her eyes intensified. The air around them hummed, and Daniel could feel it, a strange energy radiating from her. Then she collapsed. Daniel caught her before she could hit the ground. "Cyra, stay with me." Her body trembled, and he could feel her heartbeat, faster than before. Her breathing was uneven, and her skin, which had always been cool to the touch, was now warm. Something was definitely wrong. Before Daniel could process it, several Cyra royal guards rushed toward them. The Queen. One of them knelt beside her, concern flashing in his glowing eyes. What happened? Daniel shook his head. I don't know. 1 minute she was fine, and then this. The guard studied Daniel for a tense moment before nodding. We must take her to the sanctuary chamber. Daniel didn't argue. Together, they carried Cyra through the twisting corridors of the palace, arriving at a sacred chamber filled with floating healing crystals. The walls pulsed with soft blue light, as if sensing the queen's distress. They laid Cyra down on a hovering stone platform, and the healers surrounded her, placing their hands over her body. Daniel stepped back, watching anxiously as the healers channeled their energy into the queen. Light swirled around her, but something wasn't right. One of the healers gasped. Her body is changing. But how? Daniel clenched his fists. What do you mean changing? The healer looked at him. Her energy is shifting. It is as if something new has awakened inside her. Daniel's stomach dropped. Was this because of their connection at the Genesis Stone? Before anyone could answer that question, the doors burst open, and auxiliary noble dressed in black armor strode inside. His violet eyes burned with anger. Enough, he shouted. This human has done something to our queen. Daniel narrowed his eyes. I didn't do anything. I've been trying to help her. The noble glared at him. You arrived, and now she is in distress. That is no coincidence. Daniel took a step forward. Listen, buddy, if I wanted to harm Cyra, I wouldn't be standing here trying to save her. The noble scowled but said nothing. A tense silence filled the chamber. Then, Cyra's eyes fluttered open. The healers gasped. She is awake. Daniel turned back to her. Cyra. Her silver eyes locked onto his, but something was different. The glow within them was stronger, almost golden. And then, in a voice steadier than before, she whispered, I understand now. Daniel swallowed. Understand what? Cyra slowly sat up. The energy in the room shifted around her, as if responding to her will. She turned to the noble who had accused Daniel. This human has not harmed me, she said firmly. He has awakened something within me. The noble stiffened. My queen. Cyra rose from the platform, standing tall. The air around her hummed with new power. She looked at Daniel. You are not just a visitor, Daniel Rains. You are part of something far greater than you know. Daniel exhaled. Yeah, I keep hearing that. Cyra smiled slightly, and soon you will understand why. The noble frowned. But my queen. Cyra raised a hand, silencing him. No more doubts. The human stays. His fate is now intertwined with mine. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Intertwined. That sounds ominous. Cyra only smiled. Deep inside, Daniel had a sinking feeling. Whatever was happening, it was only the beginning. Daniel sat on the edge of the royal chamber, watching Queen Cyra with cautious eyes. Something had changed in her. Since she had awakened in the sanctuary chamber, her presence had become different. The soft glow in her silver eyes had deepened, taking on a golden hue. The energy around her seemed stronger, almost alive. Even the auxiliary healers whispered among themselves, uncertain of what had happened. Daniel had no answers either, but one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it had started when they connected at the Genesis Stone. Cyra stood by a crystal-lit balcony, gazing at the city below. The auxiliary capital stretched before her, its floating bridges and glowing towers shining under the twin moons. She looked deep in thought, her arms folded over her chest. Daniel finally spoke. You've been quiet since you woke up. Cyra turned, her silver gold eyes studying him. I have much to think about. Daniel sighed. Yeah, well, I'd appreciate some answers. You keep saying something awakened in you. What does that even mean? She hesitated, then walked toward him. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. My body is changing, Daniel. Daniel's brow furrowed. Changing how? Cyra glanced down at her hands. The energy within me is expanding. I can feel it growing, shifting. And it is because of you. Daniel stiffened. Wait, what? How is that possible? Cyra's eyes locked onto his. I do not know. But I believe our connection at the Genesis Stone did something neither of us understand yet. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Great. First, I survive a crash landing. Then I find out I'm connected to an alien queen. And now you're telling me I somehow changed your biology. A small, rare smile touched Cyra's lips. It seems fate has a strange sense of humor. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. Yeah, well, I'm not laughing. Before Cyra could respond, the doors to the chamber burst open. A group of Silari scholars entered, their flowing robes shimmering with embedded crystals. The lead scholar, an elder with deep violet eyes, stepped forward. My queen, he bowed, his voice urgent. We have analyzed the energy shift within you. Cyra nodded. What have you learned? The elder hesitated. We are uncertain. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's not exactly helpful. The elder ignored him, continuing. But one thing is clear. Your life force has doubled in strength. This should not be possible. Whispers filled the chamber. The other scholars exchanged nervous glances, as if afraid to speak their thoughts. Cyra remained calm. And what does this mean? The elder hesitated again before finally saying, My queen, we believe you are carrying new life. The room fell into silence. Daniel blinked. Wait. What? Cyra's expression remained unreadable, but Daniel could see the flicker of shock in her glowing eyes. One of the younger scholars spoke up, his voice filled with uncertainty. Our people have not had a natural-born heir in over a century. The royal bloodline has relied on artificial means to continue. And yet, my queen, your energy suggests that life is growing within you. Daniel took a step back, his heart pounding. Hold on. Are you saying she's pregnant? The scholars shifted uncomfortably, as if the very idea was impossible to accept. The elder cleared his throat. We do not know how, but the signs are there. This energy is new, unfamiliar. It is something we have never seen before. Daniel's mind raced. He looked at Cyra. Is this true? Cyra placed a hand on her abdomen, closing her eyes as if searching for an answer within herself. A soft golden glow spread from her fingertips. When she opened her eyes, they shined even brighter. It is true, she whispered. The chamber erupted into hushed discussions. Daniel rubbed his temples. This doesn't make sense. We're completely different species. How is this even possible? The elder shook his head. We do not know. But one thing is clear. This is a miracle. A heavy silence followed. Cyra turned to face Daniel fully. You are as much a part of this as I am, Daniel. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had faced death, traveled through unknown space, and survived an alien jungle. But this was something he was completely unprepared for. How do we even handle this? He asked. Cyra exhaled, her gaze firm. We move forward. Together. Daniel swallowed hard. He could see the determination in her eyes, the resolve of a queen who had already accepted this impossible truth. And deep inside, a part of him knew his life had just changed forever. But before either of them could say another word, a royal guard stormed into the chamber, his expression grim. My queen, there has been an attack. Cyra's face hardened. Where? The Temple District. A group of rebels are demanding answers about the human. They believe he is a danger to our people. Daniel clenched his fists. Of course. He had suspected that some Silari wouldn't accept him, but now it was clear. They were willing to fight over it. Cyra turned to Daniel. This changes nothing. You are under my protection. Daniel nodded. Then let's deal with this. Together. Cyra's lips curved into a small, approving smile. Yes, she said. Together. And with that, the battle for their future began. The news of the attack in the Temple District spread like wildfire throughout the Xylari capital. Rebels, once a fringe group of discontented Xylari citizens, had grown bold and were now openly challenging the Queen's authority. The cause: the human who had somehow triggered a transformation in their queen, a transformation that not only defied the natural laws of their species, but threatened the ancient traditions that had kept the Xylari society intact for centuries. Daniel stood at the edge of the royal courtyard, looking out over the city. The once serene atmosphere had shifted. Tension was thick in the air. Shouting and confusion filled the streets below as soldiers prepared for what could be an inevitable confrontation. Cyra stood beside him, her posture regal, but her silver eyes were filled with anger and determination. "Do you think they'll win?" Daniel asked, his gaze fixed on the distant city walls where the rebels had gathered. Cyra's voice was steady but edged with quiet rage. "They are a small faction, but they have always been trouble. This time, they mistake my compassion for weakness." Daniel glanced at her. "You're not weak." She didn't respond at first, but the faintest smile tugged at her lips. "No, I am not." They were interrupted by the arrival of Captain Zarek, one of Cyra's most trusted commanders. His heavy footsteps echoed as he approached, his face grim. "My queen," he said, bowing low. "The rebels have already taken control of the outer temple district. We must act quickly before they infiltrate the palace itself." Cyra nodded sharply. "Prepare the guard. We will face them head-on." Zarek hesitated, looking at Daniel. "And the human?" Daniel stepped forward, meeting Zarek's gaze. "I'm not a prisoner here, am I? I came to help." Zarek's eyes narrowed, clearly unsure about how to react. But Cyra intervened. "He stays. If the rebels believe they can use him as leverage, they will be mistaken." She turned to Daniel. "Your presence here may just be the key to ending this quickly." Daniel nodded, though unease still settled in his chest. He hadn't signed up for this kind of fight. But now he was in it, deep in the heart of a war he didn't fully understand. The battle begins. The streets leading to the temple district were packed with soldiers and civilians alike, some trying to flee, others prepared for war. Daniel followed Cyra and Zarek through the chaos, the sounds of clashing swords and shouting growing louder with each step. The rebels, armed with crude weapons, had already begun their assault. They were small in number but fierce, having taken control of the less defended sections of the city. The temple, once a place of peace and spiritual importance, was now a battlefield. Cyra's presence on the front lines was enough to rally her loyal soldiers. With a single command, her forces surged forward, clashing with the rebels. Daniel stayed close to her, feeling the hum of energy in the air. He had no weapons, nothing to fight with, but his instincts told him he had a different role to play. As the battle raged around them, Daniel's attention was drawn to the center of the conflict. The leader of the rebels, a tall Xylari male with red tattoos on his face, stood at the top of the temple stairs, shouting orders. "It's him," Daniel whispered. Cyra's gaze followed his, and her expression hardened. "Kale," she muttered. "He was once a loyal follower, but now he leads those who wish to tear us down." Kale raised his hand, and the rebels began charging forward, breaking through Cyra's defensive lines. The Xylari warriors were well trained, but the rebels fought with desperation, driven by an unshakable belief that the Queen's rule had become corrupt. Cyra stepped forward, raising her hand. "Stay back, Daniel." Before he could respond, she activated her energy shield, sending a wave of force rippling through the air. The rebels closest to her were knocked back, but Kale stood firm, watching her with eyes full of rage. "You think you can change the fate of this planet, Cyra?" Kale called out. "You've let a human change you. You've become weak." Cyra's voice rang out above the noise of the battle. "I have evolved, Kale. My strength now comes from understanding the power of unity, not division." At her words, a wave of energy surged from her, sending a shockwave through the temple. The rebels closest to her fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sheer force. But Kale, enraged, pushed forward. "I will not let you destroy our ways, Queen," Kale shouted. "The people will not stand for this. The human has no place in our society." Daniel felt a pulse of anger rise within him. He had heard enough of this. Kale didn't understand what they were all fighting for. It wasn't about old traditions. It was about survival. And Cyra's leadership, strange as it was their best hope. Without thinking, Daniel stepped forward, heading straight toward Kel. He wasn't a warrior, but he wasn't about to stand on the sidelines while the rebels tried to take over. Before he could act, Zarek stepped in. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his weapon drawn. "No," Daniel said, shaking his head. "I can help. I won't sit by while you fight for me." Zarek hesitated, but then nodded. "Very well, but stay close." Turning the tide, the battle intensified, and Daniel found himself fighting alongside Silari warriors, using the training he'd picked up during his time as an explorer to subdue the rebel forces. His quick thinking and the ability to anticipate enemy movements caught the attention of Cyra's soldiers. As they advanced, Kel's forces began to retreat, their morale shattered by the sudden turn of events. But Kel himself was not so easily swayed. He shouted one last order before he turned to flee. "This battle is not over." Zyra's energy shield pulsed, cutting through the air with a deafening crack, but Kel was already gone, disappearing into the depths of the city. The rebels' fight had lost its momentum. Zyra's forces had regained control, but the victory felt bittersweet. Daniel stood beside her, watching the destruction around them. "Is it over?" he asked. "For now," Cyra replied. "But Kel's rebellion is not the end. It is a warning. Our people are divided, and the path forward will not be easy." Daniel nodded, but inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was just the beginning. The aftermath of the battle left the temple district in ruins. The rebels, though defeated, had caused enough damage to shake the city's foundations. The streets were littered with debris, and the once glowing crystals that adorned the city now flickered in the wake of the conflict. Despite the victory, the air was filled with a sense of unease. Zyra's people were shaken, and the idea of a human being at the center of such a pivotal moment was still difficult for many to accept. As the city began to recover, Cyra stood on a balcony overlooking the ruins. Her eyes, now back to their usual silver glow, were focused on the horizon, her thoughts heavy with the weight of recent events. The battle had shown her strength, but it had also made one thing clear: not all Silari were ready to embrace change. The rebels weren't the only ones who felt threatened by her connection with Daniel. There were whispers in the shadows, doubts among her closest advisors. The future of her rule, and the future of the Silari race, was uncertain. Daniel approached from behind, his footsteps soft against the polished floor. "It's over now," he said quietly, standing next to her. Cyra didn't turn to face him immediately, but nodded slowly. "For now. But the question remains, what comes next?" Daniel watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You know, you've already done something most people would never have thought possible. Maybe the real challenge is figuring out how to use this new situation to make things better for everyone." She finally looked at him. Her expression softened, but there was a genuine appreciation in her eyes. "You speak as if you know what comes next." "I don't know," Daniel admitted, "but I think that's part of the point. Maybe the future is something we create together." Zyra's lips curved into a faint smile, though it was mixed with a tinge of sadness. "Together," she repeated, almost to herself. "That word holds more meaning than you know." A moment of peace. Later that evening, Cyra called for a royal gathering in the main hall, inviting the leading council members, military commanders, and a few trusted citizens. It was time for the Exilari to know the truth, to understand the connection between their queen and the human who had sparked such a shift in their society. Daniel stood by her side as she addressed the council, her voice steady and commanding. The room fell silent as she spoke, her words resonating with authority. "My people," Cyra began, "the time has come for us to embrace a new chapter in our history. We have faced rebellion, fear, and doubt. But I stand before you today with a new truth, one that I believe is not only necessary but vital for our survival." She turned to Daniel, a small but genuine smile crossing her face. "This human, Daniel Rains, is not our enemy. He is a part of the future we will build together. Through him, we have learned that we are capable of change, that we are capable of evolution." There was a murmur in the room, and for the first time, Daniel could see the faintest flickers of hope in the eyes of some of the Celery nobles. Many still looked uncertain, but some were listening, really listening. "I know that our traditions are deeply ingrained in us," Cyra continued. "But the truth is, those traditions are no longer enough. Our species has been at a crossroads for too long. We are struggling to survive. We must evolve, adapt, and unite." Daniel felt a sense of pride swelling within him. She wasn't just talking about change, she was leading it. And it wasn't just about her species, it was about all of them. Together, they had already defied the odds. They had survived the rebellion, and now they had to forge a future together. A new era. As the night wore on, the council meeting continued, but the tone had shifted. There was no longer an undercurrent of fear or mistrust. There was still doubt, of course. There always would be. But the seeds of unity had been planted. After the meeting, Cyra and Daniel walked through the palace's quiet corridors, the glow of the crystals above casting a soft light on their path. For the first time in a long while, the palace felt calm. "Do you think they believe me?" Cyra asked, her voice quiet as they walked side by side. Daniel smiled. "I think they want to believe you." She glanced at him, her expression softening. "You are not like the others, Daniel. You see beyond what is in front of you." He shrugged. "I just see you. And I think the rest of the galaxy should see you too." Cyra stopped walking for a moment, looking at him with a strange, almost gentle curiosity. "You have made a strange place in my life, human." Daniel felt a flutter in his chest at her words. "I'm just trying to keep up with you." Her silver eyes softened, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. It was as if everything that had happened, the chaos, the rebellion, the impossible connection between them, had led them here, to this shared moment of peace. "I have declared that you are a part of my future," Cyra said, her voice steady and firm. "And I will not back down from that." Daniel nodded, his expression serious but warm. "I'll stand by you, whatever happens." Cyra's lips curved into a smile, one that felt like a promise. "And together, we will build a new world." The quiet night stretched on as they stood together, the crystals above them glowing like 1,000 stars. This was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them had imagined. A future, not just for Cyra's people, but for both their species, united. And as they walked forward into that uncertain future, they knew that they were ready to face whatever came next, together.